All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining today at NYC's COVID-19 town hall for manufacturers and makers. We're going to get started. I know that there are a lot of questions that we all have that we want to get answered today, and we really glad that you're all here and you've joined. My name is Joanna Reynolds. I'm the Programs and Partnerships Manager for Made in NYC. I'd like to start off by saying that I just hope that you are all safe and well, and I thank you all for joining today, as we're in anything but normal times in every way possible. Today, we'll be answering your questions about the impact that COVID-19 has had on your businesses. So Made in NYC, we are an initiative of the Pratt Center for Community Development, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to a more sustainable and equitable NYC. And Made in NYC's work is generously supported by the New York City Council. Many of you are already Made in NYC members, but for those who are not, Made in NYC has a free membership program that supports New York City manufacturers and makers with marketing and branding support, as well as we work to strengthen the local New York City manufacturing community through events and workshops and other community building activities. And we want you to know that we are here for all New York City manufacturers and makers. And we brought this town hall together today so that we could better understand the questions that you have right now and get some of your questions answered. And so we're gonna start off by having our speakers introduce themselves. I just wanna give a really big thank you to our speakers for joining us today. Today we're going to have Miquela, Craytor, the Executive Director of MaiiC, Small Business Services, Elli Papadopoulos from Skopos, and Andrea Tan from Legal Services NYC. After all of each of our speakers introduce themselves, we'll have an open Q&A. Some of you have submitted your questions ahead of time, so we'll start off there, but please drop your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll also have the chat box open for questions, comments, and sharing of links and resources. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Miquela to introduce herself, tell you all about who she is, what she does, and what her expertise is, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here, everyone. It's a challenging time, and frankly, I hope that this conversation is a useful one in terms of giving you more insight into what's available, but I recognize there are not perfect solutions out there for the current time, and my hope is that this type of conversation leads to better insight from the businesses who are experiencing some significant financial loss and pain that can inform people in government, folks like myself, who can advocate internally. So again, my name is Miquela Craytor. I run the city's Manufacturing and Industrial Innovation Council. It is made up of businesses like many on the phone. We are meant to be a unified voice to bring together industrial companies who make, repair things, make things happen in New York in terms of the industrial infrastructure. So our members on our board run the gamut between providing power to the grid, to companies who remove our recyclables out of the city, to companies who make garments for the fashion industry. So it's a big spectrum of different members and different perspectives. And what we've been trying to do is support companies in this current crisis by learning more about their needs in terms of how to get through the next few months. And I look forward to talking more in this conversation about that. What we also know is that a lot of the financial products that came out are not quite fitting the bill. And so I would imagine that will be part of some of the questions I expect to try to manage through this. All I can say is I feel this pain. It's a very difficult moment, and whether you're on the front lines or a company that would like to be helping but can't get the insider information you need. So I'm hoping that some of the things I can talk about will be useful for your questions. But I sit within the New York City Small Business Services. MaiiC is one of many industry partnerships, and we are designed to do the work a little differently than the rest of our agency. The majority of SBS is sort of organized in your traditional ways you'd expect. There's a workforce side of our agency. There's a business support services that is not specific to one category of business, but more broadly speaking. And there's a lot of technical assistance programming that comes out of that group. And then there's also a team that focuses on helping minority and women-owned businesses get certified. As I said, I'm in the industry partnership side, which is very different. We don't necessarily run programs, but we learn from our businesses and use that to inform the programming that my agency does, or in some ways help design new programs, new training programs, new initiatives to serve companies. I'll just pause there.
Great. Thank you, Miquela, and thanks again for being a part of this today. Next, I'd like Elli Papadopoulos. If she can come and introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. First off, thank you so much, Joanna and MaiiC and NYC for putting this together so quickly, and for everybody's hard work in helping to rise up our small business community. Small business owners need it now more than ever. And this is such a time to redefine what our future looks like. So hopefully there's some silver linings out there. My name is Elli Papadopoulos. I am the founder and principal of Skopos Collective. We are a small business consultancy focused on primarily manufacturing businesses, creative businesses, local retail businesses. Skopos is a Greek word that means purpose, and our purpose is community development through small businesses to create thriving communities. We focus on small businesses in two ways, and one is through financial literacy workshops, through community organizations, and secondly through direct financial consulting with small businesses. We find that so many businesses lack a financial system, let alone understand how to use their financial information to benefit their business, apply for loans, have their back office in order. And that's what I hope to inspire across business owners in New York City, is to really get their ducks lined up for the road ahead and try and get as organized as possible. I think right now we're just in a game of buying time until we kind of understand what the near and long term looks like. Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, Elli. Thanks again for being here today. Next up, I'd like to pass it to Andrea Tan from Legal Services NYC.
Hi everyone, I'm having issues with my video for some reason, but I'll go ahead without it. Yeah, I'm Andrea Tan, and I am an attorney at Legal Services NYC. We are the largest provider of free civil legal services in the nation. I work in our community and economic development project, and at the moment we are equipped to respond to small businesses' needs, helping them explore legal strategies to help mitigate the impact of the outbreak. Some of the services include advising regarding government programs, crowdfunding, evaluating clauses in their contracts, assisting negotiating terms with landlords, suppliers, and creditors, among other related services. Our organization has compiled a list of updates and resources on our website in different languages, and this gives you detailed information on how to access unemployment benefits, public assistance, or resources, and frequently asked questions for small businesses. And I'm happy to share the website and our hotline phone number with Joanna so she can share with all of you later.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Before we hop into Q&A, I just wanted to quickly share with everyone a database of resources that MaiiC and NYC put together that tries to aggregate and pull together everything that we are finding that's out there. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen with everyone, share that with you, and then we'll jump into the open Q&A for everyone. So just give me one moment and I'll share that with everyone. One second. Oh. Okay, so here you'll see the MaiiC NYC website. This is maiiCnyc.org. And this is our resources page, maiiCnyc.org/resources/COVID-19. We have just some basic links to some of the main city resources here, some information about PPE production, as well as a calendar of other webinars and online events that are being offered. The first link here goes to our resource database. This is our resource database that we have been calling on a daily basis all of the resources that are available for small businesses, manufacturers, and makers. We've categorized resources that we found into different buckets: emergency relief, sourcing and manufacturing of PPEs, workforce, learning, so all the workshops and other learning opportunities that are out there, and so on. And so it's searchable, so you can search by funding, and then you'll come up with some of the business relief funds and other financial resources that are available. Or if you type in PPE, you'll be able to find out what companies out there are producing PPE, or what other resources are available. We've also created and aggregated this events calendar that we are updating daily with all of the COVID-19 related online events that are happening to support all of you in this really difficult time. So if you're looking for other webinars to learn more and get more questions answered and learn more, this is a great place that we'll be updating on a daily basis. And MaiiC and NYC, we have our own series of free programming that we run called the MaiiC and NYC Learning Lab. These are free marketing and branding strategy workshops for New York City manufacturers and makers. And they range from everything from DIY product photography to different kinds of marketing strategy, digital strategy, social media, website SEO, and we have, as this climate for businesses changed, rethinking how you're strategizing your business and your marketing is really important. When we are allowed to gather in spaces, we do free product photography for businesses, but that is a program that's halted for obvious reasons at the moment. So just wanted to share that with everyone. And now we are going to go into our open question and answers. So we'll pull some of our first questions and then get to it. So our first question, this is one of the questions that came in ahead of time while everyone was registering, is a question for Miquela and Elli, asking, what is the current landscape of available funding options for manufacturers and industrial businesses? It's kind of an open question. A lot has changed. Every day something changes. So I'll pose that first out to Miquela and Elli to take on.
Hi, it's Miquela. So as Joanna mentioned, the landscape of financing continues to change rapidly. As some of you may know, the city announced in late February we were going to launch some funds and grants, and those have now been put on hold. Essentially, we exhausted the resources that we had, and in expectation that the federal programming and funds would come into place. There, I think, was a sense that this was a stopgap for now while the feds got the larger package together. It is come to my attention just as of the last day or I think that the federal government now has been subscribed to a point where they've run out of money or have put their programs, the PPE and the economic injury disaster loan product on pause as well. So this is extremely disappointing and frustrating. And even before they put it on pause, we saw that there were challenges just accessing these programs to begin with. And so I would say that this is not good news. I would also say this is not, I don't expect this to stay forever. It is a moment, and I am not, unfortunately, close enough to know what is the latest and greatest machinations. And Elli, you'll probably be able to say more than I, but I know that at the city level, we have put in a number of different recommendations and requests to the future stimulus packages that include additional resources, and essentially taking the feedback we've been hearing for the last month and a half on essentially where our funds have or have not reached far enough, and tried to give those in terms of recommendations to the federal level for the next set of relief. I don't have insight as to how close that process is or how well they're listening to these recommendations, but I know we are not alone in making them. I know other states are probably doing it as well in other areas that are hit hard. But I would say that, again, there was a recognition that of what we've seen is not sufficient. Policy recommendations have been made that try to make up that recognized gap or the problems. The politics at the congressional level will be where the real sausage is made, so to say. And I think this is where, not necessarily something I want to belabor on this call, but like having a unified voice to speak on behalf of businesses in terms of what are those financial products that are needed, I think is really like, this is the time to do that, because people in government don't know what it's like oftentimes to run a business. And yet they're setting policy without any real sense of that and the challenges associated with that. So, I'll pause there. But outside of government resources, there are small groups and large groups that are coming up with other loans and grants and other relief options. Oftentimes they're very narrow and focused, so the audience of who can access them is somewhat limited. And I'll just pause there, and we can talk about some of those. For example, National Grid has some that are made available for manufacturers specifically, but you need to be in their catchment area, which is parts of Brooklyn and Queens and Staten Island. You need to be a customer, obviously. And also the use of the funds are very specific to doing something related to COVID relief and making something in the PPE world, or doing something to help in this crisis. So that is very specific, but it is available specifically for this moment in time. I know Facebook has also had some, as well as I think Verizon and Lyst, but that is closed. But everyone, as they exhaust funds, are like, okay, what else do we need to do? So I think you'll see new waves, just like we're going to see that on the federal level. And that's baseline what I have. Elli?
Yeah, no, that's a great synopsis, Miquela. Thanks. There's definitely a disconnect between what business owners need and what is out there right now. And hopefully there will be some programs that bridge that gap. In terms of what funding options are out there, regardless of disaster programs, New York City has a fantastic landscape of CDFIs, Community Development Finance Institutions. It's a fancy word for nonprofit banks. I used to work for one for 7 years, and it's a very collaborative community and very supportive community of small businesses. So that's one option for you guys. Of course, the first option, though, unfortunately, is your own money. Is there where can you put in money that makes sense? I'm sure a lot of people are deferring their own payroll, their own salaries right now. So that's a form of injecting your own cash in some way. There's, of course, so in addition to the CDFIs that may or may not have disaster programs, those CDFIs, I have a list of them here, include Pursuit, which formerly was NYBDC, a New York Business Development Corporation. Accion has been doing microlending or loans of up to $50,000 non-SBA for years now. And they also have an SBA program that goes up to $250,000, again, a non-disaster program, but the funds are still out there for you if you can access them. And I'll talk about how you can better be prepared to access them in a second. Renaissance Economic Development Corporation is another nonprofit that is processing loans of up to $50,000. They do have a disaster program. Kiva is a fantastic crowdfunding microlender where you have to fundraise first from your friends, and then your campaign goes public, and strangers from all over the world are contributing to your campaign up to $15,000 for 0% interest loan. So again, small chunks of money, but right now every little bit counts to lengthen the runway that you have. Right now, if depending on the type of business that you are, perhaps investors might be an attractive option for you, seeing that valuations might be a little depressed and investors feel like they can get a good deal. And there could be some good synergies out there. I also wanted to mention, I'm sure there's a lot of temptation for business owners out there to go after online loans like Canned Cabbage and On Deck. Very, very high risk loans that I recommend, if you can avoid them, please do. They lure you in with these, easy processing and fast turnaround times, but be wary of the high interest rates and short repayment terms. I think right now, if there's some way that you can look at your cash balance and do some cash management around how to lengthen the cash that you have by reducing your expenses. I'm sure you guys have all done that already. So, and I know it's not easy, but try to focus on those types of means rather than putting, bad money on top of a bad situation. I think you guys will be talking about, rent and what rent renegotiations might look like. And if I could just take a few more minutes to talk a little bit about, great, there's funding options out there, but the money is not easy to come by, and really the onus is on business owners to be as prepared as possible. So what do you need to do to prepare? Get organized, get all of your documents together, make sure that they're organized because you're going to have to submit them to various programs. Make sure you have a summary of all of the basic information that you're being requested to provide so you don't get loan application burnout. You want to make this process very easy for yourself and make it repeatable, and having key, financial records in order, make sure that your books are up to date, check your credit, set up a data room of all your financials, all your payroll reports, just get that all centralized. And let's see, and really get, I think most importantly, we're all in this together, and it's going to be a long road ahead of us. So if you can build a support group, big businesses have a board of advisors, why can't you? And those board of advisors might be your friends or other individuals, other business owners around that can support you as we all support each other. So hopefully, the other thing I wanted to mention, the PPP and EIDL, as Miquela had mentioned, those funds are exhausted. So Congress is, the fate of these programs right now is in their hands. And the uses of funds between the two, if you have applied for them and you're getting questions from, the banker, the underwriters. Make sure that you're not applying for the same uses of funds. The EIDL program can be used for operating expenses, as well as the PPP, but the PPP is primarily an economic development tool to get your workers back to work. So you can't use the PPP to process payroll and the EIDL to process payroll as well. There has to be a distinction between the two. So if you're going through that right now, make sure that the PPP is for payroll and EIDL is for your OPEX.
Thanks, Ellie. There were actually a couple of follow-up questions that came in related to what you were talking about. One is when you're talking about CDFIs, somebody asked if aren't they more expensive than traditional funding? And is that correct?
Some of them are. So if you're an SBA lender as a CDFI, their interest rates are capped at, prime plus 2.5%. And as we all know, interest rates are really low right now. So it is a floating rate according to whatever the Wall Street Journal rates are right now. If you go for a non-SBA loan, however, those non-SBA programs are typically made for businesses that are considered to be in a higher risk category. What does higher risk mean? Perhaps your credit has been negatively impacted. You have some derogatory items on your credit that is driving down your score. Perhaps your cash flow is tight. Perhaps you don't have sophisticated financial records. You're a harder business to underwrite for those reasons. Then those programs, the interest rate of those programs are commensurate with the risk that you potentially pose. So Acción, for example, could be anywhere between like 10 and 14%. Same with Pursuit or Excelsior Growth Fund. But again, it's good money, and they're, the goal of CDFIs, community development financial institutions, is they're community development, lenders. They're interested in building our communities, our resources. They're not in the business of, putting you out of business. So they certainly want to help, but they also have to conform to their own underwriting criteria. So yes, the rates might be higher. Just make sure that you're able to put the funds to good use, to maximize them as best as possible.
Thank you. And another quick question that came in for you is if you recommend a real estate equity loan. Oh, I think you're muted.
I'm not sure what that is. Like a loan that's collateralized by real estate?
If you own the property, I would guess, like taking a loan against
Right.
the property as an asset.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's tough to answer without knowing the specifics and what the business is facing. And if there's other means, it depends on how the funds will be used as well. If it makes sense for the business to put the money towards, continuing operations, and there's a return on that in the form of keeping the machine fed and sales coming in, then yes, but it's risk capital that you have to pay back. So if there's not really a plan to generate income with those loan funds, then maybe it might not make the most sense.
Okay. One of our other questions that came in ahead of time was that one of our businesses, I've been told that because my business was at a loss last year that I could not apply for the federal PPP. I'm a sole proprietor and don't have employees per se. The people I work with are 1099 independent contractors, so I can't claim them as employees. There seems to be no program for us. Are there any other options or workarounds that you have seen?
I'm not aware of any. And I mean, I think this speaks to perhaps, again, a bit of a misunderstanding of what businesses look like today, and that there are a lot of small proprietors who have, you know, a lot of contracted employees, and the folks who are making some of these policy recommendations are a little perhaps not as aware that the landscape, it looks a lot different today. It both poses a real challenge for policymakers because they need scale. And so when you have all these very small one-offs, they don't register in the same way. And I think, again, this speaks to, you know, every challenge creates some opportunity. This is an opportunity for those types of businesses that fit into those categories to find ways to unify the voice and put some recommendations and make sure you're, you know, through this, you know, community or other communities, and get those ideas and suggestions registered. Because my guess is that it's not, these financial products, and people making those financial products don't have a clue in terms of the scale of this. And I think it's quite large, but it's, honestly, it's one of the biggest challenges I have when I try to advocate for manufacturers in New York City, is that the numbers are so small. The perception is that it's so small, it doesn't matter, or like the voice is not large enough. And part of it is like, well, the NICS codes are out of date. Lots of people aren't even registering in the right category. So they're not quite like our census. There's a lot of people who are not counted, but they exist. And so, you know, not to be fully advocacy hat wearing right now, but I do think that that is a point made and taken, but the folks who are in places like Washington right now don't have the right story.
Thanks, Miquela. And Andrea, I saw that you had a suggestion actually for people. Would you mind speaking to that a little bit?
Yes, hi. So if you are a sole proprietor or a member of a company, and right now you're out of business and you're not qualifying for the loans and grants, especially now that you can't even apply, I would suggest that you apply for unemployment insurance with the Department of Labor website. It has very detailed instructions on how to do that. There are experts on unemployment insurance at legal services where I work, and you know, if you call our hotline, they can give you personal advice and help you figure out your exact claim that you may have. But from what I know, because you're not a traditional employee, you wouldn't qualify for regular unemployment insurance, which is usually a smooth process, but you should still apply anyway and get denied, because it seems like that's what has to happen before you can apply for the pandemic unemployment insurance. And there may already be a way to apply for the pandemic unemployment on their website, and it's not clear how much you would get, but I think you would probably get the same as traditional employees, which is you would be getting, depending on what you were making weekly last year, you would be making $500 at the most, $504 a week plus $600. And New York has a cap of like $1,100 a week. So you could be receiving up to $1,100 a week if you're approved. But definitely apply even if you get denied, so that you can have a claim started.
All right, great, thank you. And one person was asking what the hotline number is for legal services. Maybe we can drop that in the chat for everyone.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, we have it.
There
Great.
it is.
Great. So we're gonna look and see what our next questions are. I really appreciate everyone's participation so far, and hopefully we're getting to some of the questions that you have. So next up is another question for Andrea. How legal is it to not pay rent during this pandemic? Does the pause in evictions count for commercial rent?
Yeah, so, well, first, the moratorium on evictions applies to both commercial and residential. So right until, I think it was 90 days until June, but it's probably gonna be extended for as long as these last. So right now, the courts, they're not taking eviction cases. So if you don't pay your rent, really right now, there's nothing that can happen to you and your business because your landlord cannot evict you. But that doesn't mean that they I mean, they can evict you once the moratorium is lifted. So about how legal it is to not pay your rent, well, it depends on the contract that you have with your landlord. So the answer really is you have to pay unless you get to negotiate something with your landlord. And I feel like right now they should be, I mean, landlords are landlords, right? But this is the time for them to at least understand what's happening, and you have some leverage because they depend on you, especially if you have a good track record of paying your rent. You can use that to negotiate something, and look at your lease and see what are the specific clauses in your lease, because maybe there's some language about situations like when this happens, then you are excused from performing your payment of rent. But I think that's unlikely. But anyway, talk to your landlord. Everything should be in writing. And I've seen businesses that they've negotiated 50%. So I've seen businesses that they've negotiated 50% discount of the rent, and then they get to pay the other 50% starting like next year in like a payment plan. So you could do something like that. Or other businesses have been luckier with their landlords and they got a 50% abatement. So basically you're only paying 50% and that's all you will ever pay, until this is done. And maybe this is also an opportunity for you to try to renegotiate some parts of your lease. Maybe there were things that were some conditions that they didn't repair, and you could use that to say, well, now I'm not able to use the space in the way that it was intended for me to use, and there were these other issues, so maybe we come to an agreement now and let's settle on a fixed amount that I can pay. Again, you can call the hotline and then we can, or I can give you my email information and we can talk about your particular cases separate.
If I could just add on to that, I'm definitely no legal expert. So, my position is very pro small business and pro small business owner. This is a very long road ahead of us. Everybody's predicting a recession for sure. I mean, the unemployment claims are through the roof. We will go through some sort of, we are going through a very long-term economic disruption here, and it's going to be a renter's market finally. So I think that this is a great opportunity, as Andrea suggested, to talk to your landlords, talk to your vendors, talk to your creditors, talk to everybody, to plan out your cash and what your costs are for your business, to make sure that you continue to stay solvent as well. And storefronts have been vacant for a really long time because the rents have been so high. And I'm just hoping that now that it's a renter's market, that one of the silver lining of all of this is that there will be a small business renaissance on the horizon. So because of a, hopefully equalized, more equalized playing field in the future. So I think now is the time to have those conversations.
Great, thanks Elli for adding that. That was really helpful. The next question we have is still on sort of the funding piece, and it's a question around the PPP loans and grants, saying where can we find out which expenses the funds can be used for? For example, what does transportation mean, utilities, and like how can people kind of navigate that process?
Sorry, Joanna, can you repeat the question one more time in terms of uses of funds between the programs?
It says for PPP loans and grants, where can we find out which expenses the funds can be used for? For example, what does transportation mean, utilities, etc.?
So PPP is the forgivable loan program. It's called the, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting what PPP stands for. Payroll Protection Program. So if we just look at the title of that program, it's for payroll for your employees. 75% of the forgivable loan option can be attributed towards 8 weeks of future payroll. So if you keep, let's say you let your employees go already and you bring them back for the next 8-week period, and you use the PPP loan funds that you receive to employ those people, you will have to go back to the lender that processed your PPP loan and submit some paperwork to evidence that you use those loan funds for your payroll. And if you can show that, if you can evidence that through your payroll reports, for your, to work with your accountants, if you're not sure, then the loan forgiveness can be processed. Up to 25% of the PPP loan forgiveness can be for operating expenses. And if you go into your QuickBooks or your financial software and generate a profit and loss statement, anything that's in the bottom half of that statement under operating expenses would capture your utilities expenses, your rent expenses, et cetera. So that's kind of what they're looking at in terms of your financial records to substantiate the uses of funds.
Great. Thanks, Elli. The next question is a question open to all of the speakers. As a group of New York City small business owners, can we put together a presentation for the government that shows average minimum rents for small business to average mid-range rents so that the people in Washington can see how expensive it is to live and work in New York City?
I think that's a great idea. I also would say make it short and snappy. Our electeds are always short on attention. They have their policy teams that can digest more info, but make make it bold headline, key talking points. Think of threes, like 3 takeaways, 3 recommendations, and then have all the backup data that supports it. And even get into the space of like profitability. In New York, you have to sell so many more units to cover your costs as compared to a place like, I don't know, somewhere in the Midwest that's a small town or a mid-sized city. The rent is so much lower, so you can have a really slow month, 3 months, and you're not in a bad way. Versus New York, you feel that immediately. And so even I would go again into the recommendations short, but like the backup that will like give that granularity, I think is very important as well. One thing that we in partnership with another organization here in the city, ITAC, we got some survey feedback from many of the communities made in NYC. We recently pulled surveys of industrial companies, and what we learned quickly is that the runway for being closed was several weeks to less than a month in terms of getting to a place where you're not going to be able to be in operation. So I don't think many people understand that storyline and what is going to be necessary if this goes on for several months. Basically you are bringing businesses that are in that red zone, and it's going to take a lot of miracle to make it happen. So we need our people in Washington to understand that, and the financial tools that are going to be necessary to overcome that. And it goes back even like to landlords. And this is, I would agree with what was said earlier, this is the time to try to negotiate that. And at the end of the day, think about landlords, like it is hard work to find a good tenant. If you've been there a while, that's definitely on your side. And if you can like work with them to like explain, like, you don't want to, I want to be paying, but I need the runway to get back in business where I can pay. So work with me on this because, you trust me, I do pay the rent on time. Like use that as a sort of ammunition to make your case. Because at the end of the day, like it's no good for them to keep going without rent. And who else is going to be out there? You are in a place where there's going to be very few businesses who can afford anything right now. So use that to your advantage.
And one follow-up that was at the end of that question was that asking if pivoting to the production of PPE is a strategy that could help sustain businesses at this time, and is that, and sort of, well, maybe we'll get into thinking and talking about some of those questions around PPE production.
Yeah, I mean, definitely not knowing who, I would say yes and no. PPE for certain audiences, the non-medical audiences, you'll have a better chance than if you're trying to find a way to get a procurement officer at one of the larger hospitals or even a community hospital. As you might imagine, this community of manufacturers is suffering. Hospital staff procurement, they've blown their 3-year budget in the last month and a half in terms of supplies that they normally order. So there, and then on top of that, those audiences in terms of buyers are regulated. They can't just put their nurses and doctors with untested items. So again, knowing who your buyers are that would buy the PPE and what expectations are and sort of assurances you would need to give them for the item. It's something where if you were making masks for families or kids, I mean, now that everyone needs to be wearing them, and sort of like what you do to give the right assurances to the right audiences. Something that I'm trying to work on with the Made in NYC team and many other manufacturing groups around the city is sort of a couple-page guide of how do you approach this. Like if you want to make the pivot, what do you need to know? There are other resources out there, but it's kind of one of those things, if you're looking for it, you can find it, but it's not necessarily centralized, and we're going to try to do that. But again, the biggest challenge is PPE items. When you think about it, it's meant to protect you. And so if you're working in a medical facility, you obviously need to have things. That's why the FDA and CDC have gotten their assurances and certified items. But if you're selling to somebody who's not in that situation, there's more flexibility, and nonetheless, people want to know that they're going to be protected. So again, it goes back to what's the buyer looking for, and what is your product going to do to give them that that feeling of insurance and safety and protection. So there is some technical information out there, but how do we get that in the hands of folks like this that are on this call or in this meeting? And that's what we're working on. I mean, you could get your fabric tested at a facility, but that can be thousands and thousands of dollars. Again, we're trying to aggregate those resources. There are basically testing labs that can test your fabric. So like that goes back into the assurance you would want to give to anyone who might be selling it and what they're looking for. A grocery store worker is going to be different than perhaps somebody working with the elderly in a nursing home. Not a hospital, but nonetheless a different setting.
And if I could add on to that, Joanna.
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think for many businesses, I mean, pivoting is a very perhaps your only option right now, and not just in terms of PPP or PPE equipment, but what other industries are out there right now that are actually doing really well besides soap and face masks and food and essential items, but cleaning services could go under that umbrella. Education, of course, if you have kids, there's a lot of parents homeschooling their kids. Streaming content, obviously, CPAs and bookkeepers. But what else? What other services and products are out there that you could pivot into, and just kind of putting on that, as small business owners, you have worn that startup hat before. You've navigated ambiguity. And I think it's, despite all the confusion that's out there, and acknowledging that confusion within yourself, but putting on that startup hat, your resilience hat, your adaptability hat, to figure out what are some other ways that you can make, that you can transition your business. One example is speaking with a business, have had the privilege of working with a lot of manufacturers through some of the industrial organizations. And one example is a gentleman named Miquela has a company called OutSnap that provides photo booth services for major events. And as you can imagine, his business tanked within 48 hours. And he's pivoted it into, he's completely transitioned his business into, and I know about this from Made in NYC, thank you for promoting this on your website, into a company called Steady Goods that is looking to aggregate products from local makers and to promote them online, whether it be through photography, getting, promoting it through the website, creating content around it. And to me, that creativity and resilience is really at the core of pivoting, not just for PPP, but what other needs do customers have out there right now?
Great. Thanks, Ellie, for that add-on. The next question that came in is another question continuing on this PPE topic, and it was can a company producing 10,000 to 15,000 face shields per week be considered a legitimate source of PPE for hospitals and other city-funded institutions? How about those who are producing under 1,000? What is the quantified cutoff to be considered for a city or state contract?
So I would say that's a fun, doozy question. I would say I have attempted to bring it to our the ESD, who has guidance on face shields, as just an actually relevant example. The FDA guidance on face shields is that the normal test that is required that would make it a product that hospitals can buy and meets the specifications of CDC, FDA. They've waived that. They've said you don't have to do the normal test. We're waiving that for now, but you do have to comply with basically the sizing from your forehead to your chin to fully cover the face. The ESD's website, when you try to fill out their form, it gives you guidance on the minimum qualifications that certain items, PPE items, have to have, and they still have the wrong version of what the FDA guidance is. It's not updated. Now, I haven't looked at it today, so they may have changed it since I've emailed them a few times. But that's an example where things are moving so fast. Different levels of government, they're not used to this. I mean, ESC is not an expert on healthcare requirements and FDA and other certifying bodies requirements. And there is a lot of liability related to this. And so everyone is going to be properly cautious, despite the desire to activate and encourage manufacturers to pivot. But, in this case, I've confirmed through the FDA website and confirmed with an FDA specialist that what was on the ESDs is late or outdated. And so in that example, I have two informal recommendations. One, I'm happy to give you that information and point you to the guidance on the FDA site. Secondly, I would say that, get the attention of your local elected to help make and plead the case to ESD that you qualify so that they can encourage you to be considered in the ESD form. Because if you're meeting FDA guidelines, that's what ESD should be following. And to the extent that they're not, they should be more upfront about that. So that's the one recommendation I have. In terms of size and scale, I do know that at least on the city level, they have minimums of somewhere close to 500,000. They won't bother unless someone can make it that scale. And so when you think about it, it makes sense. It takes forever to fill out paperwork with the city for normal times. With something like this, while they're trying to be more expedite things, they want to make it at scale because they don't have time and staff to fill out multiple typical procurement paperwork and contract work. The other thing to keep in mind too, when you are working directly with government, there are going to be all those other challenges of who's holding who harmless. And I'm not the expert on this by any means, but I do know that at least, the city of New York, we're not going to take any responsibility if your item doesn't pass the mustard in some way. And while face shields, the New York City is willing to work with local companies, there is that legal question of who's holding who harmless. And so that has been a real inhibitor to some manufacturers willing to pivot, and rightfully so. It's a risk. I mean, you're trying to help out, but the city of New York is very cautious, and that has not changed, which is why it's all very difficult to encourage more pivot companies. I would say though, and I'll try to send the link after this, there are other states that have gotten more comfortable with taking the new guidance from FDA, new ways to work under this crisis with non-certified manufacturers who normally would be on the procurement list. And those other states, you know, might be a better place to actually make items. It's sad that you would have to sell to a different state or a different jurisdiction, but I mean, honestly, like if they're more comfortable, then why not keep your business going through those other avenues? And so I'll try to put those links in or send them out so they can be part of the follow-up. But I know like the state of Massachusetts has actually done a really incredible job of helping their manufacturers pivot, giving them guidance on how to test out their product to verify if it would meet the alternative, you know, what would normally be in a federally approved facility to test it, but like it meets those standards. So again, other states have gotten creative. Maybe we'll get there in New York, but for now, why not use your energy to go to a place that they've figured those things out.
And thanks, Miquela. There was a follow-up question about how can companies, do you have any suggestions around how companies could connect with prime contractors at this large scale in order to be subcontractors, in order to kind of navigate that or go around the process?
I guess it really depends on what we're talking about, what item. So if whoever had that question wants to be more specific, like, are we talking gowns? Are we talking about face shields? Depending on the item, there's more, again, if you're looking to supply to hospitals or in medical facilities, that's a key question. Again, like hospitals, the little bit I'm starting to learn in this journey is, you know, for certain items, they're unwilling to budge and being very much more conservative. Again, the face masks, particularly the ones that filter out the holy grail, the N95s, which are very difficult to get a hold of. So those are like the prime product that all those folks want, and nonetheless, a real short supply of them. And so if you're thinking of something like that is, you have to be in a CDC, FDA certified facility, and there's a whole journey to get there. So that's not going to happen quick. And if you were a subcontractor that's making a component for something, again, it just goes back to the product at hand. I do know in New York, the city, the mayor, made an announcement recently about willingness to get more testing kits and the swabs for testing. And there's, you know, I'm trying to get more insight into what the level of comfort, at least for the swabs, in terms of, I've heard some great stories of folks doing 3D printing of those. So I'm still not clear on the guidance on that from the city, but there is some new, you know, if you're a person who has a 3D printer, you know, I would imagine they're going to be somewhat conservative on that, but again, it's not clear yet. The guidance on that is not out just yet, or at least not to the best of my knowledge. But again, as a follow-up to this, we can like give that email out and make sure people, if they have 3D printers and maybe could do that. That's, you know, if you had the right specs for it, then you might be able to help out with that.
Thank you. One more question around specifically KN95 masks. Someone asked that if we have options to import hospital grade KN95 masks, can I sell them to the public if hospitals and essential workers can't take them?
I would say probably, but that said, yeah, I mean, honestly, this is something where even, for example, other essential workers need them. And like, to me, the KN95 is like the next best thing, that especially if you're somebody who's highly exposed because you're dealing with the public. That said, the one criticism of why most folks don't like the KN95 or why the hospitals have been reluctant on them is because of the fit of those versus the N95. That's the word I've gotten from hospitals. So it's actually, they filter at the same level, but because they don't fit as well, you're obviously going to get more exposure. So believe it or not, there have been some tests on how to improve the fit by making and almost 3D printing certain clips that would just hold your the strings better, the elastic. So in that respect, you could actually do a combo value add, sell the mask with the piece, then you got another, that could be another, that could work. And I know hospitals are even looking at that now, or considering like, what are those workarounds if they, some hospitals have like 3D printers and are experimenting to figure out solutions, and then plan to find someone who can do that. Like that's an opportunity where someone, a local manufacturer, doesn't need to be certified. But again, some hospitals are a little more innovative like that and have the staff and like the resource who have these little unique design labs, but that's not the norm. But also say there are ways to do it. It's just, I think it's one of those things where you almost have to find an existing worker, get creative with them, understand what their pain points are. And I think there was a great story recently of a husband-wife duo in, I think, Ohio, where they've come up with a device in a few weeks' time to clean and sterilize the N95 so they can be reused safely. And it was because the engineer husband talked to his doctor wife and heard the story about how, they had to throw them out after every use because you couldn't safely clean them. And he's like, well, why? In that course of conversation, they came up with some design solutions, and now we're getting contracted by the Department of Defense to make dozens of these units that are in the shipping container. So I think part of the opportunity is to figure out if you can get some insight from that, because a lot of folks who are making things, they come to this work with a eye of design and the idea of doing something no one else is doing.
All right, thanks, Miquela. So next question is sort of thinking about the future a little bit, as this is a global pandemic, it's affecting, us all over the world, and just thinking about the future of city and state purchasing. And is anyone aware of any plans to do more buy local procurement of non-PPE goods that local companies manufacture? Are there any industries that the city and state are looking to source from right now that are needed, or, just in general in the future, like in the food sector, or are there other sectors where there's interest in local goods?
I know at least on the food side, there is a large effort to try to encourage both companies who might be a food manufacturer of whatever said item to, get more, if you will, in the catering for, not catering, but selling meals for hospital staff or other food centers. And I know the city has got a few requests for proposals, both from someone who's a much smaller operation to somebody who can do larger scale. And I think those are still open. I know we've shared that out to a few folks through our network of other manufacturing industry partners. So we can make sure, again, we add those links into this chat, or someone else smarter than me can do it. So that's one example. If you're a company who's used to working with food, you could definitely pivot to do something like that. I think, beyond that, and beyond the protective equipment, you do have some examples where some companies are coming up with spare parts for things like ventilators. There are designs out there, and then sometimes relationship with a hospital will result in learning about something they need, or, again, I don't have the Rolodex of the right people to talk to. It's literally been a doctor friend who complained to somebody who's not a doctor, and that person, hey, would you know anything? Like, that's how it's sort of happened. So, just like anyone on this who's probably got a wealth of relationships, if you have 6 degrees of separation to someone in the medical community, you might hear about some of the things that they're frustrated by that might come up with the design problems that you or someone in your network could collaborate on to solve for. But I would definitely say food, that is something that the city and state government are looking to do more local stuff. I would also say one of the large problems we're hearing is, and there's no, to my knowledge, solution that's at scale or coming up with food supply, and specifically, you know, a lot of farmers and large purveyors have large bulk food that no longer has an audience in the restaurant community. Finding a way to use that to sell locally, and if you will, like whether it goes into a company, a smaller grocer here, or somebody, you know, in some cases we're hearing of people who are actually selling to direct customers. But how do you break that down when it's in bulk? You know, a family in an apartment building is not going to buy the whole vat of milk or the truckload of tomatoes, but getting some form of a subscription or way to break that down is a new, those farmers don't have that expertise. So that's a need, and that's an opportunity that someone has yet to solve for, to the best of my knowledge. But essentially farmers are like dumping milk, from what I've heard. And I've heard other stories of farmers just letting the vegetables rot in the field. So again, their audience of restaurants is no longer there. If somebody could, you know, they're not looking to make the same level of profit, my understanding, they just want to make it, and you know, ends meet. So.
All right, we're gonna move on, and we're gonna switch gears a little bit, although if anyone who is on has additional questions around PPE, essential, non-essential goods, local buying, please drop them in the Q&A and chat. And just a reminder too that, you know, keep sending questions our way, and keep them coming in the Q&A box or in the chat. Our next question is for all of the speakers. It's what recommendations and resources are available for manufacturers who operate with longer sales pipelines and will only be able to see the real impact of COVID-19 revenue loss in the months and quarters to come. That threw a little. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely is a tricky one. In some ways, it's a good situation to be in because you're prolonging, you know, that type of business and business model has the ability to prolong the effects that you're feeling, and as a business. And you know, in terms of resources, I think Miquela spoke to this earlier, that between PPP and EIDL and, you know, this $350 billion CARES Act package is just the first round of funding that I think we'll be seeing. There's a lot of philanthropic organizations and you know, in addition to the existing work that government agencies are working really hard towards, that are putting programs together right now to respond to some of the needs. And in terms of resources, I keep on going back to practical cash management. Do you have a cash budget that is able to identify, you know, what cash you're expecting in, and the costs going out, and how much of a runway between the two do you have remaining? And is there some way over the long haul for you to continue increasing that cash balance, whether it be through these funding options that are out there, or decreasing your expenses to just really help you buy time over the long haul? Yeah, and the other, you know, it's not necessarily a resource, but just going back to the pivot option, if your business will you know, sustain a reduced, or is sustaining a reduced pipeline right now, that will impact your future sales. How can you pivot your business model to reduce that future impact, since you do have a few more months to work on that, assuming that you're working on last year's pipeline now? Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely helpful. There was a question that I saw come through in the Q&A that I thought was would be helpful to address, and it's that the state, and Andrea, this might be something you might have some insight into. The state has recommended using multi-shifts and non-standard schedules to depopulate factories. Some of these strategies run into wage and hour laws, overtime after 8 hours, et cetera. Is there any flexibility on this? Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, that's interesting, because with what's going on, some people are getting furloughed but then being asked to work, and you want to be careful with the federal labor laws. Depending on the question, I guess it depends on the case of each employee. We could look at that. Do you have any particular question about the place where you employ employees? Like, you want to know how to handle employees and laying off people? Is that the question?
I think it's just sort of a question around some of basically the guidelines around irregular schedules around the factories are intersecting with wage and hour laws, and so like are going against current laws, and like how to navigate that, and is there going to be any flexibility so that they can both depopulate factories but still have people working where they're essential, versus not breaking, not going against the law.
Right. I mean, because it depends on the workplace, if there's a union contract or not, but usually every workplace is at will. So if you are an employer and you feel like you can't handle that many employees because just you don't have the sales or you can't pay them, then you're really free to let them go, or try to see what measures you can use to help them with pay, like leave, paid sick leave, or what other benefits they can get from the state government and employment. But other than that, you just have to focus on following the federal employment laws for overtime and minimum wage. So as long as you're paying the right minimum wage, you're not misclassifying employees, and you're paying the proper overtime, then I think you should be fine.
Okay, thank you. So just waiting in for our next, just a time check for everyone. It's 4:44 and we have the capacity to go to 5:30 today. So we'll gauge how many questions are coming in, keep sending them in so that we can moderate them and get them to our panelists. The next question I have is in specifically to back to some of the funding questions, and this is one that can be to all the speakers. This is application for PPP, looks at year salaries. 5 of my 9 employees left voluntarily. I can't hire them back because they won't come back. I need help covering the 4 remaining employees. What do I say on the application, which seems to focus on hiring back former employees?
Yeah, your application would be focused on those 4 remaining employees that you're putting to work. Yeah, and that would be supported by payroll reports and your quarterly tax filings, your 940 or 941.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump backward just for a second. I just got in, Andrea, the question that came to you, the employer clarified the question a little bit and said, for example, if we go to 10-hour shifts 4 days a week in order to limit the employees being in the factory at the same time, do we have to pay overtime? These are for safety-driven circumstances, so that people aren't in at the same time. Do you have any thoughts on that? Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
Yes, I can double check with the employment attorney in our organization and then get back to you. I would say that, I mean, if you are distributing the employees and then they have less hours, then that's what it is. But if they're gonna be working the overtime, which is the 40 hours a week plus, then you have to just follow those rules. So I don't think that you would have to pay for overtime if they're not doing the overtime work. But I will review the question again and I will check with that attorney and I'll get back to you for sure.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, how does unemployment insurance and the payment protection plan work together if a business is only able to get money from the payment PPP forgiven for 8 weeks and the business can't open yet? What is it appropriate to apply for before money runs out?
So unfortunately, money has run out for the PPP. So those applications are closed.
Yeah.
With respect to unemployment insurance, you know, I'm afraid I can't answer that exactly, because the big question that I don't understand, especially with respect to loan forgiveness and how these loans are being underwritten, is, you know, what is the documentation? In order to get any type of loan, and especially the loan forgiveness, documentation is absolutely required to evidence the case that you're making for yourself. Typically with economic development funds, their goal is to complement private money. So if you've got private money from a bank or private money from your unemployment insurance, the amount of funding that you would have gotten from an economic development program would be reduced by that private amount, right? Because they don't want the a duplication of funds. So I'm afraid I'm not sure how the government, you know, if you were approved for an EIDL loan or the PPP, and you received those loan funds, and then let's say 2 weeks later you received unemployment checks, or your employees did, I don't know how there would be a verification unless there's some sort of like credit check or a check with the agency. So I'm afraid I can't answer that question as well as I'd like.
More questions on unemployment. So this next one says, if you make less than $30 an hour, unemployment insurance pays better than returning to work. So how do you bring employees back?
Wow.
I don't know. That is a tough one too. Because I think that's more of an advice thing. I don't, does anyone have any thoughts on that? Ellie, do you have any thoughts on that? I think you're muted.
Yeah, that's definitely a tough question, and certainly a judgment call for whoever the worker is. You know, do they want to sit back and collect unemployment and, you know, figure out what their new career path is, or be, you know, gainfully employed with your business and have that income coming in and that experience on their resume and be active, especially if they have that opportunity to. It would be up to that particular employee. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm
Andrea,
gonna.
did you? Oh, I think Andrea had something.
Andrea, go for it.
Yeah, about the question of, you know, unemployment may pay more than if I go back to work. You know, my husband, he just got furloughed for 3 times a week. He works in a factory, right? And so he was wondering that. But what we decided is that maybe he can continue to do the work the 3 times a week, and then, because we don't know what's gonna be the nature of his work, then if they completely furlough him, then he can apply then for the unemployment. So then it will last. There will be money lasting longer, you know. So maybe take advantage that you still have hours at your work that they're offering you, because and then do unemployment when that ends. So then, just in case, you know.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Thank you. That's a great point. So we're just waiting for a couple more questions to come in, but really appreciate everyone's expertise and knowledge. I know we're bouncing around to a lot of different topics, and there's a lot of different questions and ways that people's businesses and lives are being impacted right now. You know, I think that this piece, I mean, the money is all, you know, we're just talking about how the money's run out. And so as Elli was saying, that like there are going to be a couple of different waves. And so we'll have to see what's coming next and other, you know, some of the other smaller or other sources that we discussed earlier. And there was something that was actually shared in the chat and said that there is a shared work program from the Department of Labor. We'll try to get the information on that and share it out. We have one more question that came in that is for everyone. So what are your recommended local vendors for sourcing necessary fabrics and supplies for non-medical grade PPE? Miquela, I'm not sure if you have any suggestions from manufacturers that you've spoken to.
I mean, again, it just goes back to what item you're talking about making. And, you know, in this question, it sounds like fabrics. So it's probably more along the lines of a face mask or a gown, I'm guessing, if there are questions about fabrics. So there's some actually decent open source guidance on, you know, what is a type of fabric you should be looking for in the world of this stuff. It's pretty much non-woven fabrics because it basically repels and won't allow the virus or stuff floating around enter the pass through the material. And so as part of this, we can send that open source document that gives some broad guidance, sort of use at your own, you know, caution. But in terms of sourcing, once you have that insight of what to look for, you know, I am by no means an expert. This is something where groups like ITAC, who have often found like the wholesalers for things like this. There are Fuse Hub in New York State has because of the state network, there are many manufacturers in other parts of the state or even through other states who have started to develop some of these types of fabrics. Not surprisingly, this type of material is not easily found stateside. It's really been made overseas. And so, you know, again, if you're looking for non-medical buyers, you know, having these things are, you know, what is medical grade is not as important, but you perhaps want still to achieve some level of the performance that best mirrors the setting. Again, it depends on who's using it. If your buyer is a parent who's just going out and about with their children and want to make sure their masks are right, that's a different story than a company who wants to protect their workforce when they're dealing with clients or customers. So again, I think, you know, your decision on what non-medical grade item you're making sort of depends on what audience are you selling for and what are their needs for that. So, you know, obviously businesses want to ensure that their employees are safe. So if their employees are going to want that insurance, what can you give as part of that if you're trying to sell your product? So there's a lot of things about knowing who your customer is on this and that customer discovery, if you will, for an item that you may not have insight into. So I would say you kind of need to think that through. And again, that open source this might be in there already. So use that as a sort of a way of like navigating the type of questions you would want, and then think through again, who is going to be buying it? What are they used to paying? As you figure out what's the right fabric to look for as you think about your unit costs and other things related to producing it.
Yeah, and I know for some of the fashion manufacturers that we have that are making masks just for the general public, that's a different sort of piece. And, you know, there's some resources where people are using recycled fabric, you know, so if that's the kind of mask that you're wanting to make, there's a different kind of pipeline there's a lower barrier to entry versus the medical grade, you know, fabric.
And again, even, you know, you're going out and about in a New York City sidewalk and potentially taking the subway or a bus and you're keeping your social distance versus I have to interface with someone buying groceries. and it's my business who is making sure I'm protected as an employee. So if the person buying there is the business, there's a sort of a contract, if you will, formal or informal, that your employees are going to feel that you're giving me equipment to do my job safely. I need to know that this mask will like keep me safe. That's a very different thing than I'm just going around in my neighborhood. So again, it depends, like it doesn't need to be medical grade for the grocery worker per se, but if that employer has the pressure or the relationship where like they have to give those insurances, they're going to perhaps have a different set of expectations. And that's obviously better if you're making and you want scale. So if you want scale, like these are it's going to take a few more steps for you as a business. Doing ones, twos here and there for direct to consumer is different than B2B. And so you just, those are the types of steps you need to think through as you think about who is your audience, and like, again, sort of their exposure. So again, we're working with Made in NYC and several others to like create sort of a go-to guide for like, here are critical things to think about. This conversation is like basically what a lot of that document, but will be filled in with the right links as you try to think through that journey and where the resources to find as you contemplate your decision tree, if you will, of, depending on customer, what are the critical decisions you need to make your product.
Great. Yeah, we'll definitely make sure that once we have that together, we'll share it with everyone who attended so that we can get that information out there as much as possible, and have it live somewhere really accessible. The next question I have, I think this is just a quick, and I believe that the answer is yes. Is it true that you must spend the PPP money within 8 weeks after received? And that is true, correct? I see Elli shaking, yes.
I mean, according to the language,
Right.
You have to request from the lender and prove that for the 8 weeks after the loan disbursement, that your staff was maintained based on the original payroll documentation submitted. And I think somebody asked a question like this, is kind of an add-on answer to a question that was asked previously. Was what if you're not maintaining the same payroll? Then you wouldn't have that loan, that portion of the loan forgiven. That amount would still exist as a loan over the 2-year term at the 0.5 point interest rate, and you would have to repay it.
Elli, I know you have to jump off soon, so I want to ask.
I'm so sorry. Yeah,
I have
sure.
one more question that I think that you I think everyone may be able to answer it a little bit, but it's because we were talking about the shared work unemployment insurance earlier. What is the impact on using the shared work unemployment insurance program in qualifying for PPP loan forgiveness? And is there any clash there or conflict?
To be honest, I'm not sure. And I would have to research. I would definitely want to provide a more educated answer and research that before answering it. So I'm afraid I don't know the answer right now. Anybody else on the panel?
No. Okay.
We're all kind of learning this as it goes, and everything is changing.
Yeah.
So rapidly. It causes a lot of heartburn every day.
Absolutely. And we're going to be, going through any questions or comments that didn't get mentioned and doing, as we all are educating ourselves and doing more research and trying to make sure that our bulk of resources are up to date. We'll try to do follow-ups with folks, and answer any questions that we weren't able to answer live. The next question is around funding. And it was our grants and GoFundMe's the only option for businesses that are not essential and we can't go back to work. I guess if you don't fit into one of those buckets, and I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, that there's kind of a real gap there, but I guess just reaffirming again that we don't know of anything else for those companies quite yet.
unfortunately, and this is for, let's just see the question, only asked for businesses that are not essential. Well, I mean, there's also the loan programs that are out there from CDFIs. You know, again, if you have a plan of how to use the loan funds to generate business, and that new business generation, the revenue generation, can help you repay the loan, then yes, you're a viable candidate for those types of funds. But if you're looking for more risk-free capital, then grants and GoFundMe's would definitely be the way to go for you. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Elli.
I mean, I think there are, I think I mentioned earlier, like there are smaller ones. I mean, National Grid obviously is for essential categories, so that's what your question's related to. But I think there are other ones that are coming out for MWBEs as well. I think, you know, this is a challenge, like as even with the federal funds, they like, and everything else, day to day, there's crazy constant change. But you know, this is something where, again, MaiiC and NYC and all our partners are trying to like funnel all the things that we start to learn and create sort of the hub of information. And so I will continuously checking those things as we get more insight into those resources. We're trying to send them all so that it's a common landing place for that insight. But I do think more and more groups are going to come up with a recognition that grants are needed, but they are probably going to have some like question of like, what's the value add? Whether you're working with people who are hitting sort of, if you're in a foundation space, hitting the mark for an audience that you want to see be hired back, or you're in some other sort of category of a woman, minority owned enterprise business owner, like you want to make sure that community is still strong. So, you know, short of some niche like that, I don't, you know, who knows, but I do feel like corporations and foundations are going to recognize that they need to be part of some of the solutions. And so you'll probably see more and more things pop up. There's not a lot right now, but I do believe more will come.
Yeah.
Great.
That doesn't mean we should stop and have anyone on this, in this stop advocating for it and asking for it. And again, goes back to what we talked about earlier, like tell the story about what are we as a society going to lose if small businesses don't come back, and what's the nature of what small businesses need.
Mhm.
I really think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think Made in NYC, something that we're trying to figure out, since our main expertise is in marketing and branding and community building, is how can we help tell that story with our partners that are more in the policy world and work hand in hand to make sure that we can like make that a vibrant story and an important one, while also, you know, having all of the data and everything to support all of those needs. The next question I think is an interesting one, and it's what if I want to let someone go and hire 2 lesser compensated people? The amount of payroll will be maintained just with different employees. Is this still okay? Will the loan still be forgiven in this scenario?
That's a good question. I'm just trying to put my underwriter hat on and think, you know, what would I do? Or what, you know, what would the SOPs look like? I mean, if anybody has ever seen the SBA SOPs, you can Google it. They're available to the public. It's, you know, 300-400 pages, lots of double negatives, lots of, you know, very confusing verbiage around how to qualify things. I'd like to say, you know, I'd like to think that, again, thinking about PPP as an economic development tool, as long as you're putting somebody, you know, people, bodies to work, that there should be a forgiveness component attached to it, because that is the essence of the program. Whether that translates into reality is yet to be seen, unfortunately.
I think I read, I mean, I hate to say I read somewhere, right? But
I know.
I think I read somewhere that they would not, they'll see what wages you were paying before. And if you reduce those wages, they will not reimburse you for that, because the goal is that you keep the same or you hire more. but you can't be cutting people's wages down unless they make more than $100,000. Then yeah, of course, they above 100,000. That one it won't count. So maybe watch out with that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question I actually think is for me. It is a question. It says, you had mentioned education and streaming content. Can you talk more about that? And I was mentioning at the beginning that MaiiC NYC created and aggregated a calendar of online webinars and other content that is meant to help support companies at this time. And so that we're updating it on a daily basis as we find out about more events and other learning opportunities, webinars, and online gatherings that are small business, manufacturing, and COVID-19 for business specific. And so that I would suggest everyone use that as a go-to place to learn about what's going on out in the world. In terms of MaiiC NYC's programming, the MaiiC NYC Learning Lab online educational classes and workshops are all free to companies that are either manufacturer or maker. As long as you're making a local product within the 5 boroughs, you are able to access our free membership and our free programming. All of those classes, we, as soon as this all happened, shifted online, and we're doing through like Zoom and other online tools. And there's a huge range of what we're offering. We have a class happening this weekend around new product innovation. We have a digital marketing series for fashion manufacturers that we're running at the moment that touches on everything from email marketing to content marketing, social media, and the whole gamut of digital marketing. We have a video marketing strategies workshop coming up, teaching companies who have video content how to actually make it useful to get your name and your story out there. And I think that storytelling is really important. As much as MaiiC NYC, we're telling the story of what's going on right now, we still want to uplift just the people behind all the companies that we have and tell some good stories. We have a DIY product photography workshop series. We have 2 workshops left in that series for this calendar year of workshops. Right now, kind of more important than ever, we usually do free product photography for our businesses. So we do pop-up photography shoots and take photos for you. But since we're not able to do any more of those, learning how to take your own product shots and product photos, I think is going to be really important. And one of those is happening on Saturday. We'll drop the MaiiC NYC Learning Lab workshops link into the chat so that if you're interested in registering for any of them, we will have workshops going online for basically until the end of May is our calendar of what we have offered. We're also talking about doing another town hall to address some more specific questions for sole proprietors and smaller, really small companies that are just like 1-person shows, as well as MaiiC NYC is going to be doing a weekly office hours for MaiiC NYC companies who want to come in, get additional questions answered, connect with Mariah and I, and just, have that connection and have access to us as you need us. So hopefully I answered that question around the education and streaming content. So we're at 5:10, so we have 20 more minutes to answer questions. I'm going to dive into the chat and see what else we have going on, and then we'll start wrapping up in a little bit. So yeah, so far I think we've answered some hard questions, easy, some really had a great conversation. So I really appreciate everything that you all have brought to the table today. So let's see what we have. Okay, so we do have one more question. Are there any manufacturing specific grants that we should look at, specifically automation to make up for non-returning workers? Is there anything that anyone has heard about? I don't know of anything quite yet.
I wouldn't say off the top of my head I could roll out the specific one. That said, there are a number of different federal grants that will likely come into the R&D space related to like getting through this and the recovery. And so I do believe there are going to be grants related to automation or where that sort of thing could be used to make something related to this recovery or basically helping us get through this pandemic. And it's going to be a while before we have enough items for everybody. That said, there's always, through the MEP system, sometimes there is a new effort there through Fuse Hub where they have ongoing competitive grants for automation. How that sits after this, you know, I couldn't really tell you. I do think, if anything, this crisis has highlighted the need for more local manufacturing. And you know, this goes back to like, use your voice and advocate, but to be more resilient, I think we need to have more stateside options. So I think part of the solution is more automation to get capacity and scale up very quickly. And I think that's partly one of the challenges that we talked a little bit about earlier. If the city is only willing to buy 500,000 of X and you don't have the equipment that can produce at that scale, like it kind of puts you out of the field. And it's not that they don't want to do local, it's just they can't do the small. So more advanced equipment will actually allow a different level of nimbleness than where some companies are able to do now. It's not a great, perfect answer for the question, but I would say definitely, I do believe there'll be more resources. The Fuse Hub one, we can make sure that link is there. I have no idea on the status of there was a window for March, and it was a rolling application. I can't speak to whether they'll have the next window of that, but being on that list is a good one if you're in the manufacturing space and you're looking for equipment. And so, and also happy, you know, as part of MaiiC, that is one of the things that we're trying to do is advocate for more resources for automation or technology, because we know like that's a necessary element to just, not just to scale, but in terms of how the world is advancing and how technology is disrupting industry, embracing it or finding how to make it work for you as opposed to other way around is, I think, a necessary thing. So, you know, when some level of this settles, we'll revamp our efforts, but we were putting together some resources for that. So I'll just put that plug in for if technology is something you want to get more insight on, be on our listserv so we can give you more insights into that.
Great. Thanks, Miquela. So it looks like we did have a couple more questions filter in, so we'll get as many done as we can in the last 15 minutes that we have.
I'm just going to call out. Thank you, Elli, for knowing more than I know. And the application is due tomorrow.
No, I heard it and I was like, wait, it's this week, I think, is the deadline. And it's a very attractive package. I mean, obviously it's going to be very, you know, limited to a small amount of people, but yeah.
But I actually, in addition to that grant, and I don't know if they pivoted other resources, but they actually had automation grants and equipment grants. So
nice.
Keep track of them as a resource. And they're the statewide MEP. They work with iTech, and Raj, I know you're on the call. So like those are good networks to know about those resources for manufacturing specifically.
Great. So yeah, I think that it was dropped in the, we'll make sure that gets to all of the attendees, the link for that. So the deadline is tomorrow at 4 p.m. If you're interested in that opportunity, want to lift that up. Thank you, Elli. Very, very.
I call it out.
Teamwork.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so we'll get through a couple more questions. The next one is, if you are able to return to work in order to make PPE, but can only have 50% of your workforce due to distancing regulations, how does that affect the forgiveness of the loan? It sounds like the loan is very much tied, but let me know if there's a different answer there.
Yeah, like if your payroll we're in April, let's say your payroll last March was $5,000 and you applied for 2 months of payroll, let's say that's $10,000, right? So theoretically you get a PPP loan for $10,000 to cover those 2 months of payroll. And this year you you're only able to employ 50% of the workforce due to social distancing regulations or due to just the fact that you don't have that much demand and can't employ those people. And you only have then 50% of that payroll paid out, which goes back to that $5,000 number, then the loan forgiveness portion will be based on the actual number of people that you were employing this year, in March. The difference, that $5,000 that is remaining will be a loan that is repaid over 2 years at a 0.5 point interest. So it's still really good money.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
I think folks should be hearing about that very soon, hopefully. I know with EIDL, there's businesses that are starting to get some responses with respect to like the $10,000 advance. If you're a really small business, the likelihood of you getting that $10,000 advance is a lot smaller. They're going to prorate it, according to the scale of your business, the size of your business.
Thanks. All right, next question is about unemployment insurance. So is unemployment insurance truly available to sole proprietors? I don't know anyone who has received it, and my application has been in pending status for about 3 weeks.
Yeah, I know California, the Governor Newsom of California recently opened up unemployment insurance to sole props, and I haven't heard anything about that, unfortunately, for New York State just yet. Anybody else? The available resources out there for like sole props, 1099s, freelancers, LLCs even that are not in the payroll tax system, the employment, that are paying employment taxes, the resources available to those folks are very fuzzy right now, unfortunately.
I mean, New York, you should be able to qualify. Go on the website. So they rebooted the website, the New York State Department of Labor. They rebooted it like a few days ago, and people have started to move. So they said, no, if you've already filed a claim, don't be calling again. They'll call you. They'll try to call you. But I say, I don't know, try again. Maybe do a regular unemployment application, even if some of the fields don't apply. At least you have a claim pending there. And then I saw today that if you're self-employed, you can fill out a specific application online, and it has instructions on what you need to put in each field. So maybe try again, maybe do your application again. And if they call you later, I saw that if they grant your claim, then it will be retroactive to the moment that you were unemployed.
Okay. I wanted to call this out. I did see a follow-up to the question that was asked around the impact on the loan of having to bring your employees down to 50%. And I guess the question is just asking, like, if you're, because of social distancing and physical space in a factory, you're able to bring everyone back, but not safely to be spaced out in your space. That's still, so it's sort of out, I guess, a little bit out of your control, that like you still, if you could hire everyone back if you wanted to, but you can't actually have them safely working in your space, does that still impact you? It still impacts the forgiveness of the loan, correct? Like, even that you're kind of stuck in a hard spot, it sounds like.
Yeah, unfortunately, they're going to be looking at paperwork and numbers to base the loan forgiveness. It'll be a formula that, whoever is working at the banks processing these, both the front end applications and then back end loan forgiveness, is going to be typing in a bunch of numbers, and there's a formula. And at least that's what I'm guessing based on my experience having worked as an underwriter for several years. And if the numbers pencil out, or however the numbers pencil out, will determine what the loan forgiveness amount will be. So theoretically, if you had, $10,000 payroll and now your payroll is cut in half due to social distancing guidelines, then that loan forgiveness will match that, unfortunately. But, you know, we won't know until we actually see, you know, 2 months from now how the loan forgiveness requests are being processed, and I'm sure there will be lots of stories around that. But that's my estimated, you know, that's my guess.
Okay, thanks,
I
Elli.
wonder if you can talk to the lender, right, for the PPP, whoever you're working with, because even if they grant you the, you know, based on your payroll from last year, that's great, but I don't think that you're obligated to accept all of it. So maybe you can talk to the lender and see if you can take less of what you're granted based on the capacity that you feel like you're going to be able to fill, to make sure that you can get all of it forgiven. And I mean, they're going to give you the total of the payroll times 2.5, right, to cover 2.5 months. But 20, like, you know, like others have said before, like 25% of that can be used for your operations, for your rent, your interest of your mortgage, or whatever other obligations that you have. So, you know, if you're not rehiring all of the payroll from before, there's a piece of that that you can apply to other things that are not payroll related, and the total amount can be forgiven, not just the payroll piece, as long as you stick with the guidelines of what you can use for what, you know, payroll or working capital.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah. I do think it's important for everybody to manage their expectations, though, and have a lens that, you know, I'm an extreme optimist, but right now I have a, you know, when I think about PPP and all these funding programs that are out there, I'm taking glass half, what is it? Glass half empty? Is that how it is? And I think, unfortunately, the onus is really on small business owners to try. I mean, I say this cautiously because you know, we all want to attach ourselves to that glimmer of hope. But I've been involved in, you know, 9/11 funding, you know, and the 9/11 programs that I was involved in was like in 2005 and 2006, and those programs were still ongoing. And that was an isolated event that certainly had ripple effects across the country. I was involved in Sandy, with Sandy loans, the average turnaround time, and also with Katrina, to just approve the loan and not only disperse it was 45 days. Add another 30, 45, 60 days to disperse it. And those are for the businesses that had all their ducks lined up and got first in line to apply. So I think the reality that we're looking at here with this unprecedented event, because it's not just New York City, it's not just New Orleans, this is nationwide, this is global. Resources are limited, you know, things are, you know, mired in politics. It is not going to be a pretty situation. And, you know, if there's some way to, you know, lift yourself up somehow by your own bootstraps and really hunker down for the long haul, I think it's good to have. I know you guys probably already have that attitude and are looking for the glimmers of hope, but the reality is that it's going to be really tough to access the capital that you really need to be a continuing, ongoing operation.
Yeah. There's just we're going to do one more question, and it's Elli, you may have some insight into this since you've worked in so many of these moments where there's been kind of a disaster of some kind and then a downturn. And the question is, do you think there will be funding available for expansion to fill voids due to less companies surviving the downturn? So as there are less companies afterwards, do you have any thoughts on what you've seen in other moments like this?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of opportunities, right? There's a lot of companies that are going to get shaken out during this time. And if you have the cash to sustain yourself through a runway, or to sustain yourself through this period, I mean, this is going to be a long period. Just to take a step back for a moment, businesses that have money are going to, let's say they have 6 months of capital, right? And that 6 months of capital is going to get them through Q4. And perhaps they have a little bit of, they have some additional cash infusion to keep them ongoing through 2021. But I think the expectation right now is that businesses are going to burn through their cash over the next several months, and we are going to see things really get impacted in Q4, which is historically has been very, very strong quarters for our economy, right? Q4 has been the strongest quarter. And I think that's when we could potentially be, just from conversations and readings that I've done, that's when we will begin to feel the real economic impact of that, right? Of that. So sorry, what was the question? I kind of went around in a little circle here.
I think that you did, it would basically was saying that like after the downturn, will there be funding available because there will be less companies in the marketplace, because this inevitably will negatively affect, and you kind of did answer that.
Yeah, there's absolutely, and going through the landscape of lenders that are out there, the SBA, so there's the PPP, there's the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, but don't forget that there's also SBA 7A loans. One of my clients just got processed for, and they had their application in pre-COVID, but that application just went through, and it's the regular SBA loan program. There's still funding, buckets of funding specifically for that program that lenders can deploy. So if you are one of the businesses that can leverage that program because you are able to pick up business and maximize your resources, and show that you can put that loan to good use and you have been cash flow positive historically, then you'd be a great candidate for the existing loan programs that were available pre-COVID.
Great.
And I want to say also, like, pay attention to the employee retention credit, the tax credit, because maybe you're better off with that if you're small than like a PPP. So that's where you get up to $5,000 per employee. They give you like a credit on half of what you paid on their employment taxes, their share of taxes. They'll give you a credit of half of that. So if it's 5,000 per employee, I mean, that those are some savings. Or then also evaluate what you can get through like the sick leave program, right? Because there's also a tax credit for giving sick leave. So maybe you can just take advantage of those other two programs. Look into it.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. So we're pretty much at time. So I first off just wanted to thank all of our speakers, Elli, Miquela, Andrea, for giving us your time today to speak to manufacturing companies and makers in New York City and answer some of their questions. Hopefully this was helpful, and we're going to be doing follow-up. This session was recorded, and so MaiiC, we're going to be sharing this out so that anyone who couldn't attend or had to leave early or whatever it might be can get some of that information, and we'll figure out the best way to dispense that. We're going to be going through the questions in the chat, seeing if we missed anything. We're going to be we've also been taking notes, and so there'll be follow-up to all attendees. And Made in NYC, we're here to try to be the connector, the supporter, and support everyone with marketing and branding, and just be the connector right now with all of our huge network of organizations that are supporting manufacturers right now. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And also just wanted to give a shout out in the background to Turnstile Tours, who has been in the background helping us with our tech and logistics, and just wanted to really thank them for their help today as well.
Another great example of a business pivot.
There you go. There you go. So thank you, everyone, and stay safe and well. And yeah, talk to you all later. Bye. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, guys.